Well, hello, everybody. Here we are on another Friday, and together with the two other amigos, we're going to talk a little bit about how to use financial tools to be able to help you do better forecast. And today I'm going to introduce myself a little bit, and then I'm going to pass it on to Ron and Ed to let them introduce themselves. Basically, I've been working in this field for over 35 years, and part of my job has been to get funds for companies to help upgrade the skills of their frontline workers, and it's something that really means a lot to me. And the same is for Ron and Ed, and I'm going to let each of them kind of introduce themselves as they move forward. Let's start with you, Ron.
Yeah, I'm Ron Burgess. I've been opening businesses for a long time. Started when I was very young. I think 7 of them currently, and I've been a consultant for about 40 years, both with a national consulting firm and then on my own. Worked with dozens and dozens and dozens of clients over that period of time. In retirement, I'm working with Microgiants, which is kind of part of this broadcast. The Three Consulting Amigos sort of bring expert topics to the Microgiants audience. And so glad to be here again with you two.
Yeah, hi, my name is Ed Lasek, and I'm a CPA. I've been a CFO for 30 plus years at several companies, and now I am focusing on family-run businesses, helping them transition as well as value their company, know what the business is worth, as well as optimizing their business for greater cash flow.
Well, thank you. And I guess with that, are we doing a PowerPoint presentation?
We are.
This,
I will
okay.
bring it and we'll get started.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk today a little bit about the economy, all the economic pundits that tell us what's going on and where we're going to go and where we're not going to go, and whether or not we should pay any attention to those folks. So we'll kind of jump into that. Basically, I wanted to talk to you just a little bit about an interesting, I guess, phrase or saying that I had heard this morning, which I think is a little bit on the brilliant side. It's basically, it's basically this idea that economics is really poetry masquerading in accuracy, or in precision, excuse me. It's poetry masquerading as precision. And that's by Jeffrey Tucker of the Brownstone Institute. I read an article by him this morning, and he's basically saying that, he uses all the words, we're flat. It's going to be a soft bottom. We're going to have a big year. Next year is the recession. Oh no, we've been wrong for 8 months. It'll be in 24. And another one says, no, it's going to be in 25. Whether you're in the stock market or you're trying to run your own business, right, in both cases, it just would drive you crazy. What are you supposed to do? How do you proceed with business? Are you just going to do knee-jerk reaction, or do you do something different? And so what I'm really proposing is this interesting idea, which came from an old colleague of mine by the name of John Haith. John Haith was an instructor of mine way back in the 80s on inventory control and management, very sophisticated system in planning, with a company that continues today to do retail merchandise planning. And the interesting thing is that, he used to say, why are you worried about what they're doing across the street? Pay attention to your own business. In other words, mind your own business and mind it well. And I love that. I've never forgotten that after all of these years. And so that issue really is, well, what do you do? How do you listen to your business carefully so that you can actually just live, I guess, in a way, a cocoon and just do your business? And there are a couple of things that we can talk about there. And so two or three main things, which is don't worry about the guy across the street. In the fashion business, everybody's looking through the windows. In the retail business, looking through the windows to see what's going on with the competitor. How many bags are going out the front door? How many customers are walking up and down? It's like, oh my gosh, nobody's in the store. What am I going to do? That was like the small retailer mind. And then, of course, the second one is stop listening to economists. I'm not saying that there isn't anything that's valuable from economists. I listen to them really all the time. And so I'm not saying don't listen to them, but I am saying in terms of how your business is running, just give that a grain of salt. Unless you're a doomsdayer, most business people are optimists. They don't believe that the sky is falling. You'd be going crazy if you thought the sky was falling all the time, and you go through times like we're in now and the pandemic. So just let it go. Had a conversation yesterday with a guy who runs a major plant for Mitsubishi, and I was talking about that on the news or something. He said, "Ron, I do not listen to the news." Oh, really? I mean, how do you keep up on what's going on? He said, well, I read certain things, but when it comes to listening to the crap on TV, I will not listen to it. I haven't, other than watch a movie or maybe a concert, I haven't listened to the news on television for 5 or 6 years. So now here's a guy running a major plant and he's going, I'm not doing this. Maybe that's something that some small businesses should consider. And then, of course, don't ever listen to the political stuff. But there are those rules and regulations which we highlight on a pretty fundamental way here. So that's important as to how it affects your business directly. But other than those things, hey, try to look at your own business in your own way. What are those things? What are the principles that we want to talk about? They basically boil down to 3 areas. Now, Ed does an awful lot of planning and forecasting and so forth. And so he's going to have a few things to say about this as well. But I'm basically saying, look at your revenue, let that guide you. Look at your expenses, pay attention to those trends. Look at your customers. What is it that they want? And if you pay attention to that, you can plan your own business. So Ed, you want to take any exceptions to that?
No exceptions at all. I only want to reaffirm that these are the things you should be focusing on, your customers and your expenses.
Yeah.
And investments that you need to make in the company for moving it forward. I would add
True.
investments.
Yeah, you're right. That could be 4 circles really when you talk about the capital and the investments that you need in order to be able to make this stuff really zing. So you're right about that. Now I'll just mention briefly, we're gonna begin to talk about looking at these issues, and we'll talk about the balance sheet next week. What do you take off the balance sheet in order to do these kinds of things? So you tune in again next week for that. So customers and their behavior. Pay attention to what they actually buy. Now, a lot of people want to take a look at demographics. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a first level of understanding who your customers are. And of course, you have to have some information if you're going to know that. But then you also want to watch how they behave. And behavior tends to be a better assistant in order to get to where you need to go, because you want to sell to their behavior, not to what they say they do. It's a little bit more difficult to do that, but listening to what customers tell you isn't always exactly how they behave. And so doing surveys and feedback loops is very important. And we've talked a lot about that here, but you want to keep in mind that it's what they actually do that's important. So what do they buy? What price points are they buying at? What levels of quality? Now, most small businesses will not have a wide variety of quality, so this may not apply to many small businesses. But what are their service expectations? The average small business likes to interact directly, and there's not a thing wrong with that if you can handle it and the customers pay for it. and you can be profitable, go for it, because everybody else is going to be doing something different. And so if you can talk to customers, they love that. So then the question is, well, is there an expectation that you're going to do in your industry, that you're going to do more for them than you're actually delivering? Those are the kind of tougher questions. So pay attention to the amount of service they expect, the media that they expect to use. Do they want to catch you on the phone? Will they tolerate 3 phone calls back? Will they, how do you fund and pay for that if you have too many phone calls? It's those kinds of things. Because while customers may buy an item based on a quality level and a price point, they expect service anyway. And so it's so often the service drops, and there is an expectation that it's actually better than that. Lifestyles is really a behavioral kind of metric that helps people understand not so much do you have enough money to buy a car, but when you buy a car, what car is it? Can you afford that car? Do you finance that car? Do you have an expectation of a certain kind of financing at a certain percentage? Do you have an expectation of service for X amount of months? What are all the things that are expected about that? And then trying to build your entire company, your service and your product to what the customer ultimately wants to buy and can afford to buy. So, trying to get all of those things done for the money you're receiving sometimes is very, very difficult to do, but that is in fact the challenge of delivering product and service to a customer. Second one is to look at your revenue trends. It doesn't really make any difference if the gross national product is up 3%, if your business is down 3%. You might be able to use that as some kind of a benchmark to say, everybody's going up, I'm going down, maybe there's a problem. Okay, maybe there is a problem. But the real question is, when you take a look at your revenue trends, are you down 3% every single month? Are you down 3% one month and up 3% and then down 6 and then up 2 and then up 3? What is the pattern of that? And underneath that, what is driving that? Is it traffic in your store? Is it lack of inventory in your warehouse? You can't sell something you don't have. So if you've got an inventory that is out of balance with what the buying balance is, you're going to have a problem. And when you look at your balance sheet, we'll talk more about this next week. When you look at your balance sheet and you look at that one single inventory number, the issue is not how much inventory you have. The issue is how much fresh inventory you have. Is it 30 days, 90 days, 60 days, 6 months old? Because every single month that your inventory ages, it is getting very, very old. And when I was working for this national retail consulting firm, we used to say, take a look at the clothes on the rack or any kind of inventory that you want. And instead of looking at that object, like a t-shirt or a sports coat or whatever, look at that as if it was a piece of fruit, like a banana. You can sell a green banana, you can really sell a ripe banana, and nobody wants a brown banana. That inventory, if it's a certain age, is a bunch of brown bananas, and you got sunglasses on that turn them yellow. It's like, no, pay attention to your inventory. And then you have to dig down. What categories of goods are you selling? What are the colors, styles, sizes, and brands that they want to buy? Are you making money? Are there actually good margins on those products, or good margins on some and poor margins on others? What is your supply chain like now? This is a big deal right now, right? We've got a lot of people who are having a very difficult time getting certain goods. We as consumers can tell that simply by going to the store. It's not like it was a couple years ago, but I still am pretty surprised that you can see small holes in certain products where there are either very few, maybe not any at all. And so, there's still categories that are gone. On a shopping list that I had the other day, went in, and two of the items were not in the store at all, not on the shelf, no marking, no vacant space, just gone. So you ask somebody, where the pickles or whatever it is, and they go, I guess we're not carrying that anymore. They don't really know. But what's the deal really? Well, if somebody wants pickles and you have 5 brands, they'll probably go for something else. But in this particular case, I was looking for 2 specialty items. There was no substitution. And it was like, I had to leave the store without what I was interested in buying. How many times does a customer do that before they try another store? For me, it was about twice. And then I start going to another store to get specialty items. So there's a case where that particular business and their particular revenues, if they could dig deep enough, they could have been able to tell that not only are they not selling those items, and of course they do know that, but there are people who are disappointed in who they are in the inventory they have, and have now opened themselves up to driving another 2 blocks to another store. You pay attention to your own business. If it looks as though people are leaving without everything they bought, and people, how many times do you get asked, did you find everything? I mean, almost all the time, right? And you say, well, yeah, or, nah, there are 2 items. And they go, oh, I'm sorry. Well, that doesn't do the store any good if that information is not captured and sent off to the buyer, who understands that they have just lost, out of $100, they have lost $20 of goods, of sales. Now, 20, you're down 20% because you're missing 20% of your goods. There's a trend, and you don't need to look across the street to figure out that your business is down 20%. You have to pay attention to these numbers, and you have to get into the details in order to dig out and mine these nuggets of information to help you make the real decisions on your own business. The next trend is your expenses. Cutting expenses is hard, and optimizing them might be a little easier over time.
Ron,
Yes.
I was going to say, I'd like to get Ed's input on that preceding slide if we can.
Oh, okay.
Do you have any thoughts? Because I thought, it was really helpful, but I would have, I was looking to get some input from Ed on this.
Go ahead.
Okay. I totally agree with the trends on revenue. You have to be on top of these. You have to have, I think probably a bigger component that's meant than what's mentioned is that you have to have good relationships with your customers, and you need to have open communication lines with them so you kind of know what they're up against. Unfortunately, a lot of businesses don't do that, so they think everything's fine, and in reality, the customer is very dissatisfied, and they get to the point they start looking at other options, and before you know it, they cut you out. And I think that's what Ron's trying to say. Also, we're all saying the same thing.
Yeah.
But I think Ron's approach is a little bit more sophisticated than what I'm talking about. I'm talking about just basic communication, keeping tabs of what's going on with your customers, have a relationship with them so they tell you, what are some of the challenges that they're having and how you might be able to help them solve these challenges.
Yeah, this is broken into 2 pieces, but when I say pay attention to the customer, that's sort of like more customer trends, buying behaviors and stuff. But when I'm talking about revenue, I'm talking a lot more about the actual numbers of what's going on with your inventory, the flow of goods through the store. And also you mentioned relationships. What about the relationships with your supply chain?
Right.
Yeah.
When you're talking about getting the right amount of goods in your store, whether you're manufacturing it or not, not having a product that is a component of another product you're building manufacturers all know this is a serious problem. So your relationships are really key there. And so again, that's the relationships is important in all three of these issues.
I'd like to
Well,
emphasize one other point on the slide that you have, and I think it's something that's really, really important. That's the margin of all your products.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't do you any good to be growing revenue where your margins are diminishing. You have to keep track of the margins of the revenue categories. And just yesterday, I went through like a 100-page report for a customer, for a client that basically showed profit margins by product. And he's got over 1,000 different products, and you can see which ones are adding to the bottom line and which ones aren't. And he needs to consider pricing options for the ones that are not doing well. And if he can't get the margins up, he's got to look at maybe terminating some of those relationships. So
yeah,
I can tell you, margins is really what it's all about. And margins by product is the ultimate.
So there's a case where we might just differ a little bit, because I've been in situations many, many times where you take a look at the margin, because the most of the time there were systems that could tell us margin at this level, because that was part of the service that we were selling, and so I could take a look at a wall of, say, men's shirts and give you margin on every single SKU. So then the issue there is, well, how do you make money on this? And I remember one time when I went in and I said to the owner of this very sophisticated, large, wonderful independent men's retail store, and I said, you're losing money on your white shirts. And your white shirt's a basic. That's a basic. Why do you have them priced so low, or are you putting them on sale all the time? And he said, no, I have a continual low price on these intentionally, because I know that if I have a best price on a white shirt, I'm going to sell them 2 or 3 of that, but I'm going to get 2 or 3 at regular margin. Oh, okay. So you see, now you have this interesting bundling problem. And this doesn't happen in many businesses, but it certainly happens in fashion. It happens in retail as a whole. And that is that and of course, this from stores. You go in and you see loss leaders. There are meat prices on certain items. There's no way they could make any money, but they're getting people in the store based on that loss leader. And the sophisticated ones are seeing how many other items that they buy. And then they can take a look at those tickets and they can say, okay, what's the margin on the customer? What's the margin on the sale of that particular customer? Now, why is that important? It's important because if you're not careful, and if you just cut out low margin items, you can be cutting off your nose to spite your face.
Well, that's a strategy.
Yeah.
And obviously you have to look at the big picture, but margins by product, and I would say this, it's gross profit margins on products.
Yeah, correct.
It's what you're charging based upon the variable cost of what you're paying for those products.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you need to focus on before you get to the fixed expenses.
Right.
And so, yeah, those are really good points you've made, Ron. And you got to consider the whole picture and in the services that you provide to your customers, because if you're not providing all the services and all the products that they need, you're going to miss out on business.
Yeah, that's right. And therefore, going back to the customer portion, if you don't understand what their expectations are, then you may have an issue here. And there are lots of strategies that we can talk about forever. But I mean, you go into Costco and you have an expectation of buying very high quality products at very low prices. And then they have all kinds of other stuff. They've got the men's shirts over there. They've got the water cooler over here. They've got this noose, all kinds of other stuff, a tent that, and you're kind of going, well, what is this doing here? Well, the answer is they got a one-time buy on something incredible. And, they know that if they teach their customers that it'll be here one trip, don't come back for it. We're bringing it in at a great price, it's going to be gone. And so they
Right.
train their customers to buy now on those items that are not staples or staples. So,
Right.
they understand the mind of the customer here. Many small business people do not understand the mind of the customer to this detail. And so when you wonder why Costco is still growing and independent retail stores are generally not, now you have part of the reason. And do you need to watch Costco in order to be able to know that? No, you need to pay attention to your own business in very great detail. And of course, that's the point.
Yeah, I just one other point on Costco is that you're getting a good price, but you also know the quality of what you're buying is top notch.
Yeah, that is their particular positioning, and they work very, very hard at that. I once worked for a company that sold avocados to Costco and had an opportunity to have a small demonstration of what they called their salmon program. And salmon used to be pretty expensive, and I don't know if you probably do recall. It used to be quite a luxury, more expensive than beef for sure, and that is not true today. What Costco did is that they recognized that there is a very high demand for a good, healthy fish that is easy, relatively easy to cook, relatively easy to buy, and etc. But it's expensive. And so what they did is they actually had a real program intentionally. Now we're going to move into expenses here, but this is a combination of both, to intentionally drive down the price of fillet for salmon fillets. And you kind of go, well, how do you do that? Well, first of all, they started off with a pretty good volume, and because of their prices. And then they go to their supplier and they say to the supplier, instead of selling a whole fish like this, we want to sell a fillet. We want you to cut them in half. And they're going, but that takes more labor. You're going, I'll tell you what, you do that, you cut your price, we'll give you more volume. We'll guarantee you that you're going to get more volume. And therefore, instead of charging us, whatever it would be, you can take a little teeny bit, whatever your cost to slice that is, maybe a couple cents more, you sell it to us, we're going to sell it at this price, we're going to actually eat part of the margin, and therefore we're going to increase the demand. They go back, they sell the improved product at effectively the same price as the old product.
That's
Then
a good point.
Then they did the same thing on skinned versus no skin, and several other things. It was quite technical. It's like, oh, who knew? Do you cut the tail off? You cut the head off? You skin it? Like all this stuff. You go, really? There's that much involved in selling a fish? But there is. So they figured this out, and over time they were able to increase their volume and lower their costs to the point to where they dropped to 30-40%. Nobody, and everybody knows this, nobody can compete with Costco salmon. They've got the best stuff. It's prepared in the way you like it, and you can just pick that up, take it home, put it on the grill. It is ready to go.
That strategy can be applied to every business.
Every business, every product.
It's a very powerful one, and I want to add one other point to it. You talked about adding extra volume, which is a key ingredient for growing revenue for one of your vendors. But I'd also like to say one other point, and that is paying them quicker, so they get their cash flow sooner rather than later. All business needs cash flow to operate. And so if you pay your bills on time or pay them early, if possible, that's an advantage to one of your vendors, and they'll be able to step up their performance for you and give you a better price.
Well, and actually that can be really substantial because, we won't get into it now, but if you take a look at, say, a discount that is typically offered for paying in 30 days, really you got a 1% for only 30 days, not a year. That's a lot of money. And so, to be able to mess with the cash component of we'll pay you immediately versus you giving us 30, Many retailers today operate on a net 90 or 2% 90 or 1% 90. It's like, wait a minute. How about you guys decide to pay us, the little guy, and we can operate better and grow faster if you give us the cash now? But there are a lot of people that don't consider this, because usually small businesses need, you're right, almost always small businesses need cash fast. Bigger companies can do this a little easier, but that ought to be part of the pricing strategy. See,
Consider this, there's a big idea, and I've seen this a lot since COVID, and that is offering deposits, giving the money up front. So
Yeah.
they have the working capital to produce the products for you at a better price.
right.
I mean, people are getting really creative now for figuring out ways to grow revenue and increase quality.
Well, this has become a strategy of one of my clients where, because they are cash rich, they're able to go to even their software vendor in doing development and say, we're going to pay for this particular development. We want it done in this time frame, and we're going to pay you as you spend money. In other words, you do 2 weeks worth of work, we'll cut you a check. Or they'll go back and they'll front money to a small vendor in order for them to increase their production so that they can get the volume that they need. Willing to not necessarily invest in them as owners, but willing to front cash and work with them in order to make sure they're successful. In other words, if they can build a good product that they like and is proven, and they're bigger than their vendor, they're going to help their vendor grow with them. And even though they didn't know that, that happens at Costco a lot. Yeah, so that's a great point. And of course, then moving to the third one that I've outlined here is the expense trends. We've talked a little bit about, and the most interesting part of cutting expenses is doing things like developing products and getting them at a lower price. And I wanted to say that a lot of times people don't really study wealth, and I think the three of us have done this. But whenever you talk about volume as opposed to margin, I've always thought about Carnegie, because Carnegie recognized that even though there was a big demand for steel, that lowering the price created more demand. So as steel was being adopted first for equipment and so forth, and then finally was adopted for railroads, and you needed to have a lot of rails, and that was a lot of steel because the whole country was going to have thousands and thousands of miles of steel. And he knew that the railroads would buy a lot more based on if he could do things cheaper. So he found a way to lower the cost by going into England, getting the Bessemer furnace, bringing that back, which lowered the cost because of the way it produced it a lot. And then as a result, he was able to get into the bridge building because they built bridges out of wood. And he showed them that you can, at the right price, you can build a bridge out of steel. And then he showed the architects how they could build higher buildings with steel cage construction instead of with bricks on the outside wall. And because he continued to drive the price down, he created several markets. Well, you don't see small business people think this way. But you have to remember that Carnegie was once a small business, okay? Just as Steve Jobs was once a small business. So you have to think in terms of, looking at your business, looking at your customers, finding ways to solve their problems. And in order to be able to expand your market, sometimes the answer is the Costco, which is a very high quality product at the lowest possible price you can deliver. I'm not saying that that's always true. It's nice to have good margins. But if you can keep that margin in the right place between fixed and variable, you can make a lot more money in dollars if your volume, say, doubles because your margins are lower. We can talk more about that as we get there. So yes, as Ed said you really need to know the difference between about your margin and your gross profit margin and what that is and how it's calculated, and then what the effect of fixed expenses are to variable expenses. And actually, I'm going to correct myself. I have the direct and indirect backwards, so I take that. I'm ashamed to say that say that the variable are direct expenses, not the other way around, and fixed or indirect. Put this together a little too fast. So over time, you want to be able to reduce your expenses, and it's very hard to do it. Everybody just gets out the scalpel and starts cutting. A good exercise to go through in my experience, but it's hard. It's hard to cut expenses effectively. It's a lot easier to let your expenses rise slower than your margin rises or than your revenues rises or than your margin dollar rises. That's a longer term trend. So the last one, you want to kind of impromptu, Ed, talk a little bit about this, I'm going to say the fourth key forecasting tool, which would be asset purchase. Do you want to throw in a few words about that? Because I do think that's important.
The investment?
Yeah, investment.
Yeah, I think the investment is a really important part of growing a business, and which means you got to have forecasting in mind. You have to be able to forecast your business in a lot of detail, and you'll find out points where you're going to need to make some investments, and you got to have the money available to make those investments so that you can optimize the business. So if you don't do forecasting, I really don't know how you make sure that you have the money to invest to keep the business optimized down the road.
Right. One of the lessons that I learned that struck me as hard as any is, and I didn't learn this in business school. I was years after being in a very rapidly growing retail business that I realized that I was not going to be able to fund growth myself. You hear about all these rags to riches stories and, self-made man or woman. And I started with $3.95 in my pocket and became a multi-millionaire. Well, there's a formula that is useful for rapidly growing businesses like that. But the principle is if you make 5%, but you're growing at 15%, and you have to somehow supply that growth through merchandise, you're not going to be able to fund the growth of merchandise or inventory with 5%. Because the government's going to take half of it. Yeah, excuse me, say that again, Ed.
You are a smart man. That's exactly the point.
Well, I'm not that
you got to forecast down the road, because you might be growing revenue and you think you're doing really well. You're actually hurting the bottom line of the company.
Well, I wasn't that smart. It was more like a mule getting hit over the head, because you're sitting there going, okay, I'm forecasting up 20% next year. And that means in this particular case, I'm going to have to buy another $300,000 in inventory. But I only made $50,000 in bottom line after-tax money. $50,000. How are you going to do that?
So the money you made off that incremental revenue didn't go in your pocket. It went in working capital.
No, it didn't. And the working capital wasn't nearly enough. But here's the thing. Now, I got good at forecasting. I had to. And fortunately, spreadsheets were alive in those days. But I've been in business longer than spreadsheets have. So, when that spreadsheet came out, and I could stop using these wide journals, that have all the columns on them that probably people today don't even know what they look like. But we literally used to go through with a calculator, and you'd put in sales and you'd calc it and you'd go through and you'd come up with is a profit or loss at the bottom. But it's just like doing a what if scenario, like it hardly existed, because it would take a whole day just to calculate one spreadsheet. So, it's like, well, how would
if you made a mistake, you had to go back and correct it.
Well, then, and so, here's something that people don't experience anymore. You'd go back, you'd correct it, and then you come back and you do it again. And pretty soon you've erased through the paper.
Yeah.
And now you're cutting a piece of paper and putting it down on all the erasers so that you can redo it again. So, I mean, it was like this incredible task. No wonder people couldn't do forecasting. But, so I was tasked with buying a certain kind of product out 13 months. Why? Because they didn't have production. Now, they were willing to, because I was involved in design of the product, they were willing to carry the paper if I would give them an order 13 months out. Well, I had to buy for an entire year, so that was really 25 months of forecasting. Something that nobody did in the retail business. And that was one of the main drivers of my business. So I had to figure out how to do this. Fortunately, as I say, I had spreadsheets. So you go through the process of doing this and you realize you're going to be buying $300,000 more of a product or total, but you only have $50,000 to do it. How do you do that? And so you can't do it other than stretching your vendors. And of course, I stretched them. I stretched them as hard as I could stretch them. And I was one of those, I'll pay you in 90 days and maybe you'll get it in 120 days. But I was growing so fast that the vendors knew there was going to be business there. They just had to finance it. But in this particular case, when these guys said, we were going to give you 6 months to pay for it, they capitalized my business. So there was a case where the supplier recognized that there was going to be good business for them if they only had the money to front them. Now, we're talking about the days when interest was 13%. So 6 months of interest at 13% means they lost 7% on me. Now, I don't know if they thought about that, but because I was able to figure that out, I was able to begin to deal with it in a more rational way rather than just saying, sorry, I bought too much and I don't know what to do. I guess I'll put everything on sale and make no money and I'll be out of business next year. And you won't have a customer at all. Although I had those kind of conversations with vendors. I did. They would call me back and say, gee, you're not paying fast enough. And I would say, we're not going to ship you anymore. And I'd say, put the president on the phone. Well, what are you talking about? Because I know him personally and I've had this conversation with him, and I have to have that merchandise if you want to get paid on the stuff I already have. It's a little brash. It was a little, but the truth is that until I understood retained earnings and how long it took to develop that growth, there was nothing I could do. I was stuck. I had to learn how to deal with that. So yeah, it wasn't because I was smart. It was because, like I say, I got hit over the head with a 2x4, and I had to learn some of these things. Fortunately, that was a long, long time ago, and I've been able to help clients with those kinds of personal experiences that I've had in my own businesses. And so, in a way, I feel very fortunate that I had some of those challenges. I've had both very high, rapidly growing challenges and the opposite as well, where things are not going so well. So anyway, well, I think we've come to kind of a conclusion. Any parting thoughts, gentlemen? Oh, Ray, you need to turn your mic on.
I think it was a good way to introduce the need for forecasting and why it's so important to understand the underlying financials and what you need, because without that, you're just guessing. And as you pointed out in yours, Ron, when you have to know 24 months out, you can't be guessing. You have to know as much as possible to be able to make sure that your business is still there.
Well, it's still a guess, but it's a little more informed.
Right. It's got to be a sophisticated guess.
Yeah, very sophisticated guess.
I think it's more than a guess. It has to be analyzed every month or week or whatever. You got to look at that information, and you need to fine tune it so that it's less of a guess and more
Yeah.
based upon trends.
Yeah, and we actually did forecasting, and then later on, the company that I worked with, we did forecasting for clients based on a series of information, but based on their history at the category level. And so it might be a category, might be men's watches. And so we're going to forecast men's watches alone based on markups and markdowns and inventory levels. So that's a sophisticated way to develop business, but it's also the way to make sure that you have enough in stock in order to drive your seasonal variations. It's very sophisticated, and we can talk about that. I actually built one a long time ago that about 2,000 to 3,000 stores are still using today for their open to buy, and it works. It's
Yeah,
amazing. It works. Yeah.
I was going to say, I know I had the pleasure of working together with Ed on a company and using a lot of his tools and the review of the findings month after month after month. We increased their cash by 8 times. It was just a remarkable opportunity to see in practice what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, these are all interesting points, and I ran across a company. I got a call this week from a company that is ultra rich group of people want to build wealth, and what they want to do is they want to start buying companies that are underperforming, put them on a plan to perform more effectively and to really grow their wealth this way. And really, in reality, it makes a lot of sense because a lot of small business owners don't operate this way, and they're leaving a lot of money on the table. So I found that really interesting that, we talk about that. We kind of dig around this issue, and we talk that this might be a good opportunity, but other people are seeing it as an opportunity now because of underperforming businesses.
Interesting. Well, gentlemen, I think this was a good conversation. Thank you for kind of laying it out.
Excuse me. Excuse me. I'm sorry about that.
That's all right.
Thank you very much. I'll cut that part off.
All right. Well, anyway, it was a good conversation today, guys. And Ed, I look forward to hearing your kind of expansion on it next week.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
It'll be good. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.